Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar, which is Delivering a Sustainable and Thriving Community. We're going to be looking at how the next generation of web mapping can be used to solve sustainability challenges and to hit ESG targets. Before I begin the webinar today, just give some information. So the session will be around 40 minutes, and we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. Time permitting, we'll be having a question and answer session towards the end. There's a question panel on the application, so feel free to submit any questions at any time throughout the webinar. And it'd be really helpful if you could complete the exit survey, which we sent out at the end of the webinar. This just helps us with future webinars to make sure they're as useful as possible for you. And then finally, just to let you know that you are currently in listen-only mode. So we can't hear you, but hopefully you can hear us. To introduce your presenters today, first of all, my name is Will Stephen. I work in the business development team here at CADCorp, working mainly with local and central government customers, helping them to make the most of their GIS investment. Simon is also joining me today, so over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Will. Good morning, everybody. My name's Simon Parker. I was team leader at CADCorp, and this morning I'll be demonstrating some examples of mapping can be used to share ESG data for your org.
Great, thank you, Simon. I think, yeah, we got that there. We're going to turn our cameras off now, just to make the broadcast a little bit better for you. Great. So to start with, we're going to tell you a little bit about CADCorp for those who are less familiar with CADCorp, and a little bit of information on the product which Simon will be showing today, which is SysWebMap. Then I'll give some information on environmental social governance, including some examples of different ways which local governments are using web mapping to meet the ESG pillars. Then I'm going to hand over to Simon for a demo of SysWebMap and a couple of add-ins which can be used in SysWebMap. Then at the end, I'll round up everything with some key takeaways and take any questions which have been asked. It's quite good just to understand a little bit more about who is attending today by asking a couple of poll questions. So I'm just going to launch the poll here. So the first question is, are you currently using GIS to support sustainability initiatives at your organization? So this can be using GIS in any way to support sustainability in particular. I'll just leave that up there for a couple of seconds just to see the answers coming in. Okay, I'll end the poll there. Great, so as expected, most of the attendees today are using GIS in some capacity to reach sustainability challenges. The second poll question I'm going to launch now. So do you offer web mapping to the public for addressing sustainability challenges? So do the general public have access to any web mapping which you have, and does it target sustainability? I'll just leave that up there for a second. Okay, so just looking at the results there, it's looking like, so 50% have said no to that one, and 10% have said yes, and 40% unsure. So yeah, more of a mix, which is sort of to be expected on that one, with less. Obviously, a lot of the attendees today are using GIS in some capacity for sustainability, but probably missing a bit of engagement with the general public, which we will touch on today. Great, so I said we'll do a little bit about CADCorp to start off. So CADCorp developed GIS software, data and services here in the UK, and have been doing so for over 25 years. You can see here the range of sectors who we work with, and looking at the attendees of the webinar today, we have a good mix of different organisations from local government and housing and property, and some of the other ones which you can see along the bottom there. This is the CADCorp Spatial Information System, or SIS, which is our product suite. On the left-hand side here, you can see our range of products and services all in one integrated system. Today, we're going to be focusing more on the top one, which is the web mapping. Some of our key strengths are also listed on the right-hand side. For example, we support over 300 data formats, including Ordnance Survey, the advanced functionality, which is all out the box, and then the customization and development. CAD Corp Sys Web Maps, this is the product which we'll be using for the demonstration today. So this is the interactive website for end users, app developers, and system integrators. It's one solution which can be used on both the intranet and the internet. So that poll question, which I asked about presenting the public with web mapping to tackle sustainability issues, Sys Web Map can be used to present any mapping to the public, as well as for corporate GIS. The admins are able to cut down the interface and data as appropriate. For example, if it's the public facing, then you can limit the capabilities so that it's a little bit more simple to use. And then it's also licensed per service. There's no user restrictions or restrictions on the maps or data. And it's also supported on a mobile device as well. Okay, so to set the scene for today's webinar, I've shared an image here which most will be familiar with as the Sustainability Development Goals, which was set out by the UN. The UK is committed to the delivery of these SDGs. The government set out that the most effective way to do this is by ensuring that the goals are fully embedded in planned activity of each government authority, therefore placing sustainability at the forefront of importance for local government. In the UK, over 300 councils have now declared a climate emergency, and many are assessing risks and developing plans on wide-ranging services, including roads, flooding, fire, natural environment, housing, public health, and social care. We're going to be touching on all of these today. There is a framework which many organisations use to address sustainability amongst the community, and that is the ESG framework. So the ESG has become a major focus of local authorities in recent years, with a heightened urgency to tackle important issues from diversity through to sustainability. ESG has three main pillars: the environmental, social, and the governance. The environmental is the safeguarding of the environment, including policies to address climate change, biodiversity, and energy and water efficiency. And the social is the impact on the community, fair working conditions, labour policies, and supporting equality and diversity. And the governance, which is the final one, is the ethical and anti-corruption practices, compliance, transparency, and commitment to shareholder and voter rights. I'm going to go into more detail for each of these ESG categories and give some examples of how GIS, and in particular the web mapping, can be used to help tackle some of these challenges. So environmentals. The environmental aspect looks at the stewardship of the environment. Local authorities provide and maintain many a range of recreational services, such as parks, commons, playgrounds, and exercise areas, which benefit the community further. To enhance the natural environment and sustainability, web mapping can be used to identify and preserve green spaces. The image which I've shared here shows the green spaces in the local area using OS Green Space. This can then lead to enhanced biodiversity through more informed land use planning. We have an example here of recycling centres being displayed. This is used to inform the general public on the public-facing web map where the recycling centres are located and how far is the nearest postcode, how far is the nearest recycling centre from your postcode. The final example here is for EPC data, which can be used to improve the energy efficiency of homes. Due to high demand from local government customers, last year CAD Corp actually released the EPC data service. This has the latest EPCs geocoded to UPRN with access to over 10 million properties in total, and it's updated quarterly. It's also possible to extract and export the data into your own repository. And the social aspect considers how a company treats people, including its own employees and the wider public population. Good transport networks play a vital role in our communities, providing access to opportunities, healthcare and education, as well as unlocking economic opportunities in tourism and leisure. Analysis can be undertaken to investigate the optimized location for public transport. The example which I've shared here is for bus stops, and we're showing a 400-meter isochrone for each bus stop. Similar can be done for the second example, which is for public health centres. So on the public facing web map, we can show the public where their nearest health centre is, but the data can also be used internally, as we've shown here. So this is for this can be used for planning, just to show where resources should be allocated, or where the optimized location for GPs might be. Finally, we have reporting tools in WebMap. So the add-in Report It allows the general public to locate and report incidents on a map. In this example here, it's specifically being used to report antisocial behavior such as fly tipping or abandoned vehicles. The governance, so this looks at organizations' policies and how it is governed. Web mapping can be used to help inform decision-making at local authorities. You may have seen our webinar last week, which discussed how web map can be used to help with flood risk planning, action, and recovery. Today, Simon will be showing an example using the query tool. So the query tool in web map can be used to find properties which are in an area such as a flood zone. It can help with land use planning. So we've already touched on some analysis which can be done, such as using isochrones to show the distance to bus stops. We can also show cycle routes on the map, which may demonstrate either an over or under provision of safe cycle paths. My final example is for EV charging stations, which seems to be a really hot topic at local authorities at the moment, with the government announcing that there will be a need for around 300,000 public charging points as a minimum by 2030. So OS-NGD land use can be used to identify potential new sites for charging stations. There's also an initiative which I came across for London councils, which encourages members of the public who do not have access to off-street parking to suggest a potential off-street EV charge point. The add-in which I mentioned on the previous slide, Report It, can be used to collect suggestions of EV charging points from the general public and present them on a map to show where the demand is highest. Great, that's all I was going to touch on from my side today. I'm now going to hand over to Simon, who's going to go into more detail and demonstrate how web mapping can be used for those.
Thank you, Will. So I'll just share my screen and then I'll make a start on my demonstration. Great. So yes, I'm going to share some use case examples of how web mapping can be used to share ESG data for your organization. And I'm going to share some use cases around the natural environment and sustainability, energy efficient homes, managing assets and risk, sustainable infrastructure planning, and finish off by looking at public health and well-being. So I'm going to start with some examples looking at the natural environment and sustainability. And I'm going to look at the presence and preservation of green spaces. Now, you might have your own records of all the green space areas in your local authority, but there are many data sets that you can tap into if you don't. Now, the OS Open Green Space is a good starting point. It includes areas such as public parks and gardens, allotments, and also play spaces. You could also grab the woodlands features from the OS Open Zoom Stack data, which we can see on the map currently. Or you can tap into some of the national designation data sets, like the Ancient Woodlands data set from Natural England, or perhaps Triple SIs or Ramsar sites as other examples. Or with my sort of focus on York today, as part of their local plan, they have these designated green infrastructure corridors, and these are areas designated to deliver a wide range of ecosystems and enhance biodiversity. And what will also be interesting is how the introduction of biodiversity net gain in the planning application process will develop over the coming years, where as part of that planning application process now, applicants must demonstrate how they'll improve biodiversity on site, or they can purchase credits to improve biodiversity and habitats on other land designated for this purpose. So having access to this type of data helps you to visualize where your green spaces are and how they can be preserved. Now, moving away from the sort of natural environment and just thinking about sustainability for a moment, obviously one of the key objectives as a local authority is to encourage as much recycling as possible and reduce the amount of waste that goes to landfill. Now, one of the ways you might do that is to position local recycling centres in optimal locations that residents have easy access to them and are therefore encouraged to use them. And in York, here are the locations of recycling centres, and it appears there's a pretty good spread across the city. But we could analyse this further and look at the accessibility of recycling centres by performing some routing analysis. So I did some analysis. So I took the Ordnance Survey code point dataset, which shows postcodes, and then I used a road network also from the Ordnance Survey to calculate the distance from every postcode in York to the nearest recycling centre. And then I coloured each postcode based on the distance. And so this type of analysis is showing how accessible each postcode is to the nearest recycling centre. I'm not sure if there's any sort of national guidance or advice on this, but maybe for the purpose of my use case, I'm going to say that being within 3 kilometres of a recycling centre is really good. Anywhere beyond 3 kilometres, we perhaps want to investigate further. And here is a filtered view of that data set, just looking at the postcodes that are more than 3 kilometres away from a recycling centre. And perhaps it's a result we might have expected based on the sort of makeup of the York Authority, where the main urban area of York has good accessibility, whereas the sort of out of town areas not so much. And it's this type of analysis that can provide this really useful insight and help you look at opportunities to maybe introduce new recycling centres and encourage more recycling in these out of town areas. So those are just sort of a couple of ideas and pointers to the types of data sets that can be used to help understand the makeup of the natural environment in your local authority area, and also looking at a sustainability use case as well. Okay, so let's move on to sort of the next use case example, and we're going to look at improving the energy efficiency of homes. Now, local authorities still own over 1.5 million homes, therefore there's that responsibility to ensure these homes are safe and also energy efficient as well. And there's a big drive to ensure these properties meet a minimum EPC standard of C by 2030. And a huge benefit for the tenants is a more energy efficient home, reduces energy bills, and provides a warmer home. So understanding the performance of your property ownership is key in meeting this target. Now, there is an open EPC dataset which you can download and access yourselves, or you can access the service from CADcorp. We provide the data as a service where we store and update the data on your behalf when new updates are available. And the data set looks a little bit like this. So this is a view showing EPC ratings for my council-owned properties. If I click on one of my properties, it includes a host of information, which includes its current rating, but it also provides lots and lots of sort of attributes and details about many of the different components that impact on the energy efficiency of a property. But thinking about the 2030 target, we're more interested in properties that don't meet that C standard currently. So here is a filtered version of that data, but now only showing as properties currently rated worse than a C. Now, the benefit of viewing this information on a map is that we can identify any groups or clusters of properties that aren't meeting that standard. And with web mapping, there are opportunities to visualize that information in many ways. And here is the same information, but I'm using clusters to identify where we have these groupings or large number of groupings of properties that aren't meeting that C standard. And this could be helpful when you're thinking about programming major works to improve the energy efficiency of your properties. You can target groups of properties at the same time to help improve the energy, the efficiency of the works as well. Okay, so let's move on to sort of the next use case example, but keeping the theme of looking at your property assets. Now, a common environmental threat that we must deal with in the UK is the threat of flood, and there are several data sets from the Environment Agency that we can use to screen for vulnerabilities to our assets. And as Will mentioned earlier, if you missed our previous webinar about conveying flood risk, I recommend watching the recording via our website because we discuss this in more detail there. But for today, I'm going to focus on the flood zone data from the Environment Agency and use it to screen for council housing and see if there are any assets at risk to flooding. So we could use web mapping to do a visual check by simply overlaying the data sets and looking on the map. Or in the top left-hand corner, we could use a query function to search for addresses that intersect a flood map. So using this query function, I'm going to search for my council assets, and I want to find any assets that intersect this flood area. So I'm going to select the flood area. I'm going to complete the wizard. It will then search the asset data using that flood map area, and then the output at the bottom of the interface is this table, which gives me a list of all of the council assets that are within this flood zone. And we can see in the bottom right hand corner, it's reporting that 20 addresses were found. You can also export this list of results as well to CSV, so you can utilize that information outside of the web map. But this is really useful analysis because it's important to understand if any of our assets are at risk, and it means we can look at how we can maybe mitigate that risk, which might involve deploying some flood prevention methods to the assets themselves to make them more resilient to flooding. And then just to show you another example of risk, another popular use case is considering the risk from trees. Now we know that trees bring significant benefits to air quality and habitats, but they need to be monitored and maintained to ensure they don't pose a risk to assets and people. And of course, with our weather climate, the felling of trees caused by storm conditions is a factor as well. So recording and mapping the location of your trees is an important function. And I read a use case recently from one local authority who classified each tree based on the proximity to either an asset or whether they were close to a busy pedestrian walkway or next to a play area. So they classed and identified all of these trees in these busy areas as high risk, which meant they were inspected on a more regular basis compared to other trees. If I just turn on this particular data set, this is showing our land ownership. So our land parcels owned by the local authority. And you can perhaps use this information if you are in a position to plant more trees. Now, I'm aware that there is national funding available to help you with this, but you could look at where your existing trees are and also your local authority's land ownership, and you could use this information to plan where you can plant more trees. So yeah, a platform like web mapping can help you understand the potential risk. In my use case examples today, looking at flood and trees, but you can probably think of some other use cases as well. Okay, so let's move on to our next use case. We'll move away from assets and we're going to look at sustainable infrastructure planning. Now, the adoption of electric vehicles is increasing. Therefore, the demand for access to EV charging points is increasing as well. And here is a data set showing the location of EV charging points in York, and we can see some obvious patterns here. We've got some groupings of EV charging points, especially around the town centre. Now, if we're looking at opportunities to improve the availability of EV charging stations, I downloaded from the Ordnance Survey the land use data set. and I cherry picked some of the sort of land use types which might be suitable for a feasibility study. So I picked out park and ride sites, public car parks, and also retail sites as well. So that could be useful information alongside your own local knowledge when exploring opportunities to install more EV charging stations. And then just sort of referencing the use case that Will described earlier about the London boroughs who are encouraging residents to suggest locations near their home where an on-street EV charging point could be installed. And this type of use case could be supported by the reporting add-in in WebMap, which could be used to allow members of the public to suggest locations for EV charging points, and this reporting can also be integrated within your existing system. So from this drop down, as a visitor to the website, I want to suggest a location for a new EV charging point, and I'm going to do that by clicking a location on the map. As part of the report submission, the next step is a form, and this form can be designed to your requirements. So you can choose what information you want to gather from the report. Now, these fields can be mandatory fields. You can also design fields with drop-down lists with predefined values. And here I've just replicated the form that we've seen from the local authority use case. So in their form, they're asking for a contact name and your address. They're also requesting information about, do you currently have off-street parking? Do you own an electric vehicle? Their form also asks, are you a blue badge holder or are you a taxi driver? If I click next to complete the submission of this location, it just requests one more form of contact, which is an email address, a little security check, and then click send. Now that report, it gets saved in the database, but that report is also sent as a sort of an email notification to a team that can manage that particular request. So it's a simple, intuitive way of using web mapping to maybe allow your community to suggest a location for EV charging point locations. Now, just moving away from EV charging points, web mapping can also be used to display cycle routes as well. Gives you the option there to be able to see where they are, where they serve, and using your local knowledge, you can look at opportunities to extend the cycle network to reach other areas. And then finally, you can also look at other forms of sustainable transport as well. Perhaps you want to look at the bus network. So here I've got a data set of all of the bus stops in York. So lots of bus stops servicing residents of York. And I performed another bit of analysis based on accessibility. Now, this time using a known standard that it's good to be within 400 meters of a bus stop so that you can access public transport. Again, I used the road network dataset from the Ordnance Survey to create 400-meter isochrones from every bus stop in York. And this is what the output looked like. So if you reside in one of these green areas shown on the map, you are within that 400-meter accessibility standard to the bus network. But most importantly, we want to identify areas which aren't within that standard. So what I did is I downloaded the Ordnance Survey built up area data set, and then I subtracted my 400-meter isochrones from this data set to produce my final output, which basically shows the areas that are not within 400 meters of a bus stop. Now, the very sort of small areas, if I just zoom in slightly there, are probably quite negligible in terms of distance from a bus stop. But the most interesting places to look at will be these larger areas on the map. And, there might be opportunities there to explore with local bus companies how we can perhaps improve access to the bus network for these particular areas. So for my final use case this morning, we're going to take a look at sort of public health and well-being. And firstly, our health is very important, and having access to medical services is key in helping us to stay healthy, and local authorities have a key role in improving the health of their local population. We work in partnership with clinical commissioning groups and other organisations. And one aspect is that our population is growing, people are living longer, therefore the demand for health services is growing as well. And population, yep, is a key factor. And in this sort of simple example here, I'm mapping population numbers by LSOA to kind of understand the makeup of our local authority and understand where the highly populated areas exist. What might be interesting is to overlay the location of GP surgeries within the authority. And yep, interestingly here, there appears to be several practices to sort of the west of the city, but less so in the sort of the east and southeast, where we have areas of high population. Alternatively, we could take another different take. So if I turn on this next example, here I'm looking at population change over the last 10 years. So the red areas basically show where we've had a decrease in population, and then I've got a scale of from orange to blue here, showing areas where we've had an increase in population. Now, there are, of course, many other factors we could look at, but this type of insight can help us establish the demand for health services and decide if we have the services we need in the correct locations. And then just to finish off my demonstration this morning, I'm just going to talk about ASB. Now, yep, ASB can be a significant problem where we live, and there are a variety of measures that are used to try and tackle that problem. But we need to know where our problem areas are so that we can address them appropriately. And we can simply show our historical ASB incident data as a dot map. Maybe we can identify patterns or areas where ASB is more prevalent. We may visualize that as a thematic map. So here I'm using wards as my geography, and we can see in this visualization these sort of three distinct sort of darker red areas where they've had sort of high numbers of ASB. Or we could take a slightly different approach and use a hotspot visualization instead. So looking for locations where there have been sort of high density or concentration of incidents within our local authority. But all of these approaches with the map can help us target our resources accordingly and tackle the problem in the worst areas for ASB. So that brings an end to my planned demonstration this morning. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you too much, but it just proves there are so many use cases for using web mapping to help with your ESG objective. So thank you for watching my demonstration. I'm now going to pass you back to Will, who will conclude the remainder of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Yeah, that's great. And I can see there's some questions coming in as well, which we'll get around to answering towards the end. Great. So just to summarize on what we've talked about today and what Simon's shown you. So ESG contributes to long-term economic, environmental and social resilience. And it's really important that local governments consider sustainability at the very forefront of their planning. And GIS is a massive help with this. We've shown a number of ways in which SIS Web Map can be used to address ESG targets which you may have at your different organizations. The versatility of Web Map means it can be deployed on your intranet for admin purposes and planning, and on the public-facing internet for community engagement via a web browser. Report It can be used by the public for reporting things such as fly tipping, antisocial behavior. And then we've shown loads of examples. Yes, and then finally we've shown some analysis which can be undertaken and presented using Web Map. Yes, we've shown loads of examples and given ideas to you today for what you might be doing. So you might be thinking, what next for you? So if you have web mapping at the moment, then that's great, as we've given you plenty of ideas for different maps which can be set up. If you need help with setting up mapping, then CADCorp can offer consultancy services and training to support you with setting them up. If you don't have any web mapping at the moment and would like to start providing something similar to the examples today, then that's also great, as you're in the right place, as CAD Corp can provide a fully hosted web mapping application for you and help you set up any mapping which you require. Yeah, just to give a little plug to our next webinar in this webinar series which we're running. So in our next webinar, we will talk about how web mapping can be used to inform future planning activities and highlight opportunities for economic, social and environmental growth. And we'll send you a link for registration after this webinar. Great. I'm now going to finish off just by looking at any questions. I'm going to turn my camera on and look at some questions which we've had asked. So it looks like we've had a few questions about mainly about the data, so where different data sets have come from. So there's been a number of different data sets which we've shown. They're including Ordnance Survey and National Open data sets, and they're all available via the CAD Corp data service. So that's a managed service which provides direct access to a range of open data directly from a secure CAD Corp data store. Also, more specifically with regards data, so Alice, so you've asked, is the EPC data for council-owned properties only? So the EPC data is for as the latest ratings for all residential properties within Great Britain. There's over 10 million properties in total in that data set. Just looking, Simon, this one is probably might be good if you can answer this one. So is the distance from bus stops, the 400-meter isochrones that we were doing, based on roads and footpath routes or a circular buffer from a center point?
Yeah, so an example I shared today, yes, I was using the Ordnance Survey road and path data to perform that analysis in our sort of desktop software, which we've not used or demonstrated today. You've got the flexibility to choose how you want to perform that type of analysis. So you could just do roads, or you could do roads and footpaths. But yeah, using the sort of Ordnance Survey roads and footpaths there to do that analysis.
Great, thanks Simon, and thanks Graham for that question. Just looking at some other questions. So from Ian, what training is available to achieve these maps? So SysWebMap is designed to be easy to use for non-GIS users, and therefore there's no training specifically for just using SysWebMap. The examples which we showed today do require some admin and setup, and Simon just touched on SysDesktop. So we have training for WebMap admin and SysDesktop as well. And there's also the CAD Corp, I touched on the previous slide, the CAD Corp consultancy and managed service, which is available to you. That's probably all the questions we'll answer today. There's a couple more technical ones, but yeah, if you have any more questions, get in touch with your account manager and they'll be happy to help you with those. So yeah, that brings an end to our webinar today. Thanks very much for attending, and thanks Simon for doing the demonstration. As I mentioned at the start, we'd really appreciate if you could take some time to complete the short feedback survey, as it helps us deliver as much relevant content as we can in the future to you. Thanks very much. Bye.